what we see in the personal development realm isn't necessarily accessing all of us. They're teaching us systems and concepts, and it's a lot of mental stuff. But that's not where the true wisdom is. It's not in the mind, it's in the body. And you're obviously familiar with intuition. It's one of the most powerful things. And if you can tap into that, now you're accessing the superconscious. Now you're accessing a part of yourself that is so much more powerful. And you look at all the stumbling blocks and roadblocks that we have around us to keep us distracted so that we can never actually access that.
Man of Mastery, episode 81 with Paul Shepard. Hey, welcome back, guys. Today we're back talking again about purpose, about life's mission, about fulfillment. Paul is a really interesting guest that we have on today. He helps leaders, entrepreneurs, just growth-hungry people discover their life's purpose, their unique gifts, their mission in this lifetime so they can really do what they love, make a living at it, serve the community, and contribute from it. And that's really, hey, what this show is all about, right? It's about making ourselves better so we can make those around us better. We've talked about purpose before, and I think it's so important, and it is recurring because so many of us reach this quote unquote success, and then we see what that looks like, we feel what that feels like, and we realize, well, there's more to it. And so we're looking for what that real fulfillment is, what it looks like, how to reach it, how to get there. And that's one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to Paul Shepard. He's been on an interesting journey himself. He's reached a level of business success and like many entrepreneurs, made it, lost it. He's tried a number of things. And in that, as he went searching for some of those grander questions, he invested so much time, so much money in human development and self-improvement, and then finally clicked on in 2 hours a technique that sort of explained it all to him, explained himself to him, and it's enlightened what he really wants to do for the rest of this life and maybe beyond. And I say that because I thought we were going into some pretty standard questions here, and we very quickly get into some pretty deep stuff, talking about ancient wisdom, talking about healing techniques, and the opposite. What happens when you don't heal, when you don't address trauma, when you don't tap into that growing knowledge that you're accumulating throughout time. So really interesting guy, and he's doing his work through a Facebook group he calls Soul Purpose Mastery. So as you listen to today's episode, if you find it interesting, make sure you hit the links for this episode and go over there and check him out and check that group out, as I am. He is doing a giveaway once a week of a free demonstration or consultation using the technique he learned, applied himself, and has evolved since then. So I'm looking forward to checking one of those out and kind of what it looks like, what the technique is, understand whether it resonates with me or not. But it sounds super interesting. Clearly the benefits he's gotten out of it, and we talk about the extension again of that to health and a number of things in life, even PTS, veterans, treating any number of things. So super interesting chat with Mr. Paul Shepard today. Let's check that out. All right. Fantastic. We're rolling. Paul Shepard, thank you for joining me today. We're going to splice in a lengthy little intro here, but I appreciate your time. You're coming to us from Sydney. You're an entrepreneur, successful in the business world, but really we're going to talk more today about you're a coach. You've invested very, very heavily in yourself and self-development over the years. But I think those things go together for a lot of us in the sense that as we go through life, we become successful in some maybe traditional aspects of life. We start reaching for things like fulfillment and how to really be happy. So I love what you're doing. You talk about combining spirituality and science to really find fulfillment. So I'm interested to explore all this with you today. Again, welcome, Paul.
Thanks, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here and looking forward to see what this conversation, where it goes.
Yeah,
thank you.
Absolutely. Just give me a bit more background on yourself, if you could tee it up, probably better than I did on your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to share. So I started out in business as a kid in personal training, And it's just been one business after the next until I lost everything. 24, 25, I lost everything. Two businesses I had, and the opportunity to make millions of dollars and some big contracts and things that I wouldn't necessarily be super proud of. In other words, it wasn't really a legacy for me. So I spend a week not sleeping, thinking about, my gosh, I've just potentially earned all this money if I accept these contracts. I haven't got to do a lot of work for it. I could lose my soul doing it. But what next? Once I've got all this money, millions, what would I do? And that's when the first time I actually thought about purpose, because I felt like I was, a phony. I felt like if I went down that path, there was no essence of who I was. It was just I was doing things for money, and I had no goals beyond that at that point in time, because growing up in a not so wealthy family and parents who weren't into personal growth and spiritual growth and didn't have much wisdom in that area, money was their only thing, was survival. So they were stuck on Maslow's hierarchy at the very bottom: food, shelter, survival, and a scarce mindset. So I was absolutely determined to change all that. So opportunities came up very early on in life to change that, but not in the way that I would have liked to. So I had to decline, and that's when this conflict of beliefs started. I need money to have options and be happy. Then money's not going to make me happy. So what now? And that was the confusing point. That was when it was just like, oh my gosh, what do I do? So from that point on, it was went into the military to continue growing and learning as I'd lost everything. And that was, again, a challenge to keep the growth happening, but just with a different focus. I didn't think that would be a long-term career. I didn't exactly want to go and kill people. That wasn't my kind of reason for doing it. But I knew the training would be good, both mentally and physically. And I was curious, how far could I push myself? So that was the next challenge. And then coming out of that was in corporate, and spent probably 4 years in corporate doing change. So helping organizations just cut the fat, get back to the basics. And I was blunt. I was direct coming out of the military. I wasn't refined, wasn't very diplomatic. And then I spent the last 10 years running my own sort of consulting agency and coaching. So the common thread with all that was I didn't fit in. I had this constant barrier of, I just don't belong here. I've got these different skills that aren't really kind of mainstream, and I could see things that others couldn't, but I never had the depth to specialize in one particular field. So that was my challenge, and that led me to keep searching. Where do I belong? All right, where do I belong? What am I supposed to be doing in this world? And that's when, I think 4 years ago, I came across something called human design, if you've heard of that.
Yep.
And within 2 hours, I had 20 years of my life explained. And I just, my gosh, where the heck was this 20 years ago? Why have I wasted so much pain and suffering and money trying to figure things out? And some guy just gave it to me in 2 hours on a level that was so deep that it just transformed everything. So that's kind of where this journey began, around how do we help people figure out their purpose, was because I spent 20 odd years trying to find mine. And I thought, wow, how energized am I now? How clear am I now? How much more impact am I making now? How much more do I love my day every day now? How much more fulfilled am I now that I've figured that out? And I realized that that's probably most of the planet hasn't actually discovered that yet, despite success in their career or their relationships or the family. So that's what I'm setting out to do now, is whether it's one person or 100 people, it doesn't matter. If I can help others shortcut that process to more fulfillment, I think the world's going to be a better place.
Yeah, beautiful. So there's a bunch in there that you just said. One thing so I'll pick out a couple. So one I wanted to mention, you and I were just talking briefly off air before we started about, well, your military background, your selection process, and some of the things I've gone off and done as an adult in what I'll call crucible events, manufactured crucibles. And I think I've approached that, or I've really found that to be an amazing tool from the perspective that it seems that life will throw us its own crucibles, right? Its own challenges, whether it's on an individual basis, whether it's 2020, COVID-19 quarantine, whatever it is, right? Life is going to have its severe challenges, and you can either be unprepared, or you can go do these things to try to prepare proactively to learn a bit more about yourself, to learn about how you handle hardship. And same thing with business, right? I don't think I've ever met an entrepreneur that hits the home run the first time out of the gate and keeps it, right? So, maybe you hit it at 24, 25 years old, and then you lose it. A lot of entrepreneurs, really it was the third time or the fifth time or the seventh time or worse. So somehow failure is such a huge process of learning in life, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the journey, isn't it?
It is.
It makes you value what you're doing and never give up on it, I guess.
And
Because
you mentioned going off and doing so much self-development investment before you found the one that clicked for you. In fact, you're quite transparent. You spent $500,000 in personal development,
isn't it? It's a bit embarrassing, isn't it?
Either
I'm super thick or there's something missing from those programs.
I don't know. I kind of admire, your willingness to invest in yourself like that. Most people aren't. It goes back to, same, right? Growing up with a bit more of a scarcity mindset that I don't know how to explain it. Maybe you can put it in words for me, right? But when you have that scarcity mindset, that's what you realize as well. On the other hand, when I started to meet people who said, well, money is a renewable resource, and it's just an exchange or a form of energy to exchange, and coming at it from an abundance mindset seems to yield abundance.
Yeah.
Do you find the same? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And a lesson I learned from a mentor probably 7 years ago now was, Paul, how are you measuring your worth? And up until that point, it was always measured through, or predominantly was through, bank accounts and assets, because that's what we're groomed for. That's what society programs us for. But the message I got from this mentor was that look at your intrinsic value. Look at the information you hold, not just in this lifetime, but the collection of all your experiences from multiple lifetimes. Sure, we might not be able to remember all that, but we still hold those information particles. And that can be accessed by tapping into certain things. And there's a lot of different healing and a lot of different ancient techniques that can tap into that wisdom. And that got me thinking. I thought, oh, wow, okay. So we can't ever lose value. We can only increase in value. Right? And then if you look at how our entire system's created, it's based on that, which I won't go into. It's a deep kind of rabbit hole. But it made me think, wow, okay, so if I can increase my value faster, surely I'm going to get to an outcome where I can contribute more. And therefore, if I can contribute more, I can actually earn more. And that was essentially the basis, even as a kid, was learning. And what started off this personal development stuff was all through network marketing, funny enough. Got into network marketing at 19 by accident and thought it was a great idea until I realized that a lot of people hated the concept and didn't want to participate. So I didn't make anything out of it necessarily, but I learned so much and I got really caught up and excited about the potential of learning. And that was what kept me in there for 3 years, even though I wasn't making anything. So that's what then stemmed into then going out and seeking out other people to learn from, whether that's books, courses, events, personal coaches, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think absolutely everyone needs to invest in themselves, because you are the product, and at some point you can translate that into something tangibly beneficial to yourself and your family, everyone around you. And it's just a matter of what's that going to be. So,
absolutely. And kudos, by the way, on turning down a payday. Not many people make that decision, right? To take the time to sort of weigh it out and be able to walk away.
Tough, man. It was tough, especially dreaming about the homes and the cars I might buy at 24, right? So yeah, it was tough.
I just want to take a quick left turn on the point you made about continuously increasing value and tapping into accumulated wisdom, past lifetimes, epigenetically, whatever that might look like. Do you have a particular daily practice in your life? And in particular, is part of your practice geared towards accessing some of that knowledge, ancient wisdom?
I wouldn't say it's a daily practice. I think, I have daily practices, of course, and it's typically a sunrise, which is essentially a way to reset my circadian biology. It's a health thing as well, and it excites me. You watch the sunrise, you ground, you go for a swim in the ocean. It's just the perfect way to start the day. bit of cold therapy, breakfast, just time for myself is really important. That's self-love. In terms of accessing that ancient wisdom, I mean, you've got mainstream people like Brian Weiss, who's a psychologist in America, who's written many books on this. I think Many Lives, Many Masters is one of them. But there's a lot of people out there that can do the past life regression stuff. And this has been proven. And there's been so many stories and books and actual cases where, people, for those that don't believe in reincarnation, there's I can't remember specific names, but there's been many stories where kids have come back, or kids have been born and they've told their mother and their father, hey, I was killed by this person at this time and my body was buried here. And lo and behold, the police have gone to investigate that, found the body, and this kid was actually the father of his current parents. So, if that's not proof enough, I don't know what is. So the likes of Brian Weiss, and I just mentioned him because he's a mainstream sort of name, can go and do this past life regression work. But then you've got shamans, you've got other ancient spiritual people and indigenous communities that can do a lot of work, whether that's through sound, a lot of sound healing you can do that activates your DNA and allows you to access this information. And that's when you start going on this spiritual journey, because what we see in the personal development realm isn't necessarily accessing all of us. They're teaching us systems and concepts, and it's a lot of mental stuff. But that's not where the true wisdom is. It's not in the mind, it's in the body. And you obviously, for me, with intuition, it's one of the most powerful things. And if you can tap into that, now you're accessing the superconscious. Now you're accessing a part of yourself that is so much more powerful. And you look at all the stumbling blocks and roadblocks that we have around us to keep us distracted so that we can never actually access that. Just like they're telling us to look over here, but hey, I'm going to look over there, and oh my gosh, there's something so much more profound over here. So that's part of what I'm always looking for now is looking in the other direction from what we're being told to look. And once we go within, we start to access a part of ourselves that has all the answers. People talk about ascension. We can talk about inscension, going inwards, because the answers aren't outside of ourselves like I was pursuing for 20 years. The answers are inside. You just need to know how to look for them and know how to use this vessel, this vehicle that we've been given to be able to navigate that. So that's the biggest thing that I can sort of share with people around that at the moment.
Well, thanks for mentioning Brian Weiss. I'll check that out. Just something that came up for me in that by chance, my wife and I sat down to watch a movie just the other day, and it's on Amazon Prime Video here in the US. So you have to see if you have the same over there. I think it's called Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. So we sort of turned it on.
Yep.
Have you heard of it?
Yeah. Dr. Stephen Greer actually
yes.
tried to book in a session to go and actually meet some of these ETs with him. He does field trips over in the States.
He does, yeah, and I've seen a few from around the world. So
fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe there's no such thing as coincidence, but I've just watched that, and now we're having this conversation, and you've obviously explored Dr. Greer. What was surprising to me is the movie turned very quickly from this concept of viewing UFOs, making connection, everything he does that you're aware of, to, well, hey, look, this whole thing is really about a connected consciousness. And he's got some very fascinating studies he mentions in there of scientific demonstration, not only of human consciousness, but plant life consciousness, and being able to measure that or observe that. And then really ultimately his point is of this universal consciousness. So at the same time that time and space converge, and it gets to this point of getting past this whole materialism and the scarcity we were just talking about, to a place of abundance, and then being able to focus on other things about raising our consciousness. So that really is what the movie ends up being about, is this discussion of kind of this higher level of consciousness and making this contact to begin that dialogue, and maybe get past some of the propaganda and stories that may be holding us back from exploring that.
It's fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah.
What an eye-opener that the information he shared, and the stuff he's like the official documents that he shared too, from unacknowledged through to CE5. I think that's still on my list, actually. I still actually want to go around and see him and do that. It's typically what I do is watch these documentaries, contact the person and have a coaching session with them, and or go and meet them and spend some time with them. That's typically how I learn. So that's awesome, man.
Yeah, no, I love that. You know, one of the things that's come out of just this podcast journey for me is sort of, you know, your concept as well of, you know, if I can reach, if I can resonate with, if I can, you know, touch and help one person or 100 people or 1,000 people or 100,000 people, right? As long as it's valuable to someone, then it's valuable to me. But the other thing that's been amazingly valuable to me is just being able to reach out and connect with people. Oh my gosh. You know, I've just read a book by this guy that would be amazing to explore further, and just, you know, reaching out, sending a message, email, phone call, whatever it might be. Hey, can we have a chat about this? And people are so open to, you know, share their knowledge, share their experience. It's amazing.
It is, isn't it? It's beautiful.
Yeah, it is
I
beautiful.
love what you're doing, Michael.
No,
Absolutely.
same to you. So human design, what was so different about that after all the other things you'd invested in that gave you that clarity in such a short time, 2 hours, I think you said, on working that? How does it differ?
That's a good question, actually. I think the human design system is, for those that don't know, it's a synthesis of 4 different types of astrology. So you've got Western astrology, Chinese I Ching, the Brahman chakra system, and the Kabbalah tree of life. And then you've got modern science over that. And the way it's presented is not like your typical astrology, because typical astrology is really confusing. I've had a few sessions in the last 10 years, and it's a different language. It's just like, what? You lost me in the first 3 sentences. So human design really breaks it down and simplifies it and articulates aspects of oneself that we've never heard before. So it's introducing different concepts. And the best way I can explain it, it's giving you a 3D perspective on yourself, as opposed to what most people are used to, which is looking at a psychological profiling tool, which tells you, you know, which label belongs to you, which in my experience has never ever worked. But human design goes sort of 3, 4, 5D, if you like. It gives you a multidimensional aspect of who you are. So that's where the richness is. And then when you get things explained to you around, you know, why you do certain things, naturally that, you know, I would do certain things, right? Whether it's go out in the morning after my sunrise and just be around people and sit at a cafe and have a coffee and just watch people. Yeah, that's part of my aura type. I just need to be around that energy. Don't necessarily need to interact with them, but I enjoy being around people and just people watching, for example. So all these things are explained, and these little things that we tend to gravitate towards, they're all explainable. And that's where the science of it comes in. It's just like, well, hang on a second. If someone who doesn't know me, who's never met me, at the age of 39 tells me, you know, what's happened to me in the last 20 odd years of my life, and in explicit detail around how I behave, I thought, okay, that's a science. And that's an incredible science that I wasn't told about at a young age. So that was why it was different. It wasn't like, yeah, go out and do an incantation or a positive affirmation or all these things that I've found just don't work, because our subconscious is going, hey, said, dude, that's rubbish. Like, you don't really believe that. So we're anchoring and making these things worse. But when you get told, or shown rather, the unique aspects of who you are, now you've got full permission to be yourself. You're no longer trying to fit in. Now you have a deep, rich understanding of who you truly are and what those gifts really are. So you can actually go out into the world like confident with who you are to be able to make an impact, because it's not an accident that you're doing these certain things. You're doing them because that's your design. And I use the analogy, it's like you don't see submarines flying around in the sky. You know, they're not designed for that, right? You don't see airplanes racing around the streets because they're not designed for that. So just like humans, and that's why I call it human design, is because, you know, you're designed for something very specific. And when you figure that out, you can accelerate that potential. So that was the biggest breakthrough that, you know, of my life. And I've had many, many teachers and shamans and psychics and astrologers and healers and mainstream people and business people. But that was the most profound. And that was why.
So if I understood that right, and let me tie it together with something we talked about a little bit off air. You mentioned gifts and passions, and I think you just said passions again. So our trajectory in the Western world is, you go through grade 12 and then you go off to university, and somewhere along the way, someone has said, well, you've got a test score, you're really good at math and science, and you should pursue a career in engineering, or something along those lines. And off you go into education, off you go into the working world. And somewhere along the way, you go, well, I don't know, maybe I was skilled at this, but I'm not sure how fulfilled I am in this. I'm not sure how happy I am in this. So that was sort of our traditional Western way of trying to identify gifts, send somebody on a path, but it really left a question of happiness and fulfillment. And it sounds like when we talked off air and we use the terms gift and passion, this is a different way to figure out, as a human being, what are our unique gifts and what fires us up. And if we can recognize those and then figure out how to spend our time channeling or applying or using those to the benefit of whatever we serve, then that's where fulfillment and happiness can come. Is that the right way to understand it? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Those gifts are things that they're potentials that you're born with. That's why some people are great on podcasts and others not so great. Some people are great at acting and others are not. Some people are just magnetic when it comes to money. Others are not. Some people can just come up with ideas creatively. Others can't. We've all got different gifts, and that's the part of understanding what are your gifts. And through human design, I do something called BG5, which is a different language of human design. It's very, very geared towards entrepreneurs and corporate. So the languaging is even more understandable. And so that's the whole thing, is lifting the veil on what are your true gifts, not what you did well at in school necessarily. Because if anyone applies themselves enough, they can become good at something. But there's friction. So we use something called resistance and friction. Anyone can learn anything. But for one person who could become really good at math easily, another person might take 10 times as much effort to become good at it. But essentially they can both become good at it. Maybe not in all cases, but in most cases. Whereas the human design system looks at the gifts very specifically, around what is your career type, for example, what environment you work best in, whether it's individually, partnerships, in a small team or a large team, in large corporate. Where are you going to stand out? Where are you going to shine if you're in a large corporate? What areas of that business are you going to get pulled into based on your gifts? Your decision-making strategy. This is what I call giving people their compass back. Giving them the GPS back so they can navigate life knowing how to make the right decisions using their intuition in their body, because it's always talking to us, but we never get taught that because we're so programmed to be analytical. And then actually figuring out what is the purpose. So everyone's got a specific purpose, as in how you're going to fulfill your mission in this lifetime, right? And it's not what people think. So there's a little bit of vaguity about it, which is why I use other tools to, that whole Venn diagramming concept, to narrow down the focus. So once someone's got the clarity as to who they really are, what they're designed for, what those gifts are, and even telling them where they're going to find most fulfillment, it doesn't mean there's only one thing you can do, because then we look at people's passions and say, right, well, this is your blueprint. This is what your gifts are. This is what you're designed for. And these are your passions on the other side of the equation. How can we synthesize the two to give you a lifestyle that's going to be, enriched with meaning, purpose, contribution, pay you handsomely, and allow you to essentially be in flow without the resistance? And that's what this is all about. It's about removing resistance and getting people in flow, because that's where they're operating at the highest level, and they're broadcasting a frequency into the field that's coherent, rather than broadcasting static and causing more and more frustration and pain and anger and dis-ease, as we call it. Right. And that's what most people are broadcasting. They're broadcasting dis-ease.
Yeah, absolutely. There's one, so one of the operating systems, if you will, that I'm familiar with has a similar concept. And in that Venn diagram, it combines in a third thing, which you mentioned in other words, really, which was principles or value systems, or you mentioned in terms of how you work best. As an example, I've had business partnerships in the past where we may all have an aligned business vision, even a strategy, but we may have very, very different sort of values or principles or views on how we should approach accomplishing those things or realizing that strategy. What kind of culture do we want to create? How do we want to treat employees? Do we engage them as partners, or do we treat them as, sort of hierarchical? What's even down to the sort of moral version of that? How are we going to treat each other? How are we going to treat our customers? So yeah, if you don't combine those things also in a way that resonates with the type of people that you go about that mission with, and the way that you want to conduct yourself and applying your gifts and your passions, then you're missing an element there as well.
Absolutely, man. Totally agree with that. Also, in the cycles too, one thing I've learned through astrology is we have these cycles, whether it's a 7-year cycle or a much bigger macro cycle, around when we're going to, like, when it's time to run versus when it's time to just kind of sit still. Felt like I have a better explanation just to keep things simple. I never really bought into that until I met a lot of people in the business and commercial world that were very successful, like extremely successful people. And that to me was just like, wow, that these people live by these systems and technology. I thought, wow, okay, so they actually make key decisions. They will go and set up a company on a certain date. They will go and roll out a marketing plan on a certain date based on astrology. I thought, what? I thought this was all for, Byron Bay hippies, but there's actually a science to it, and that's how they achieve the success. So yeah, the cycles are important too, knowing when to run, when to sit still, when to study hard, when to launch something new, and tapping into that energy, because it's all energy.
It is. And I've seen the real estate prices in Byron Bay. So there are some very, very successful Byron Bay hippies financially.
Right. Absolutely.
Right. So there must be something to that. But, this may not be the perfect example or application of this, but I can, something that just springs to mind that I relate to in that is there are times when I've really pushed something from a business perspective, meaning it didn't naturally flow. There was a lot of friction. It was done by brute force. And sometimes I call it, getting fancy or painting the corners, when you're really kind of reaching for these edges, and whatever the resistance is I've moved against in those cases, came back to bite me. Took some substantial losses when I was just pushing too hard. And maybe that was the time to just rest and idle for a minute in the place that I was, rather than to keep running.
Surrender,
or pushing forward.
Yeah. Absolutely, man. Look, I've had many of those too. Like, I call them failures, but they're obviously lessons. The most recent one was probably 3 years ago, 2-3 years ago, where I was in a global health startup, just trying to solve a chronic disease problem, and there was just so much friction. I mean, I was pushing boulders uphill. It was just, every day was painful, and there was this frustration. And frustration for me is one of my signposts to know when I'm off track. I'm doing what I'm not supposed to be doing. So yeah, that was a big pain point in terms of what I should not be doing. And I ended up walking away from that business for 2 years. I worked flat out, didn't get a cent out of it. Got a lot of lessons out of it. But then I work on other projects like what I'm doing now, and it's just things that are coming out of the woodwork. It's effortless. It's I've still got to turn up. I've still got to put my put on a show, so to speak, and be my best. But it's not like I'm having to struggle doing it. There's actually enjoyment in the process, whereas, as you said, some things that are a severe struggle, it's the resistance. And that's the lesson to say, hey, that's not for me. So, but a lot of entrepreneurs were taught to, never give up, right? You push through, and the training you're doing with these Spartan races and everything else, right? You can't give up. I was definitely trained that way as well. So it's about knowing when to give up, like identifying what's an opportunity to give up versus when you need to push through. And that is a key distinction. When we can figure that out, we know when to apply ourselves and when to surrender and back off, and I think surrender is when magic happens.
Yeah,
I'm under control.
One of the recent events I did, we were talking about just before we hit record. It was a 3.5 day event, and there was one evolution in there that just went on for quite a long time. I don't want to give anything away, right? Because this is part of the secret sauce to the process, and I know people who are going to do future versions of this training, right? But something that went on for quite a long time and sucked pretty bad, right? But you kind of only have a few choices at that point, right? You can ring the bell and quit. I suppose that's always a choice in training or as a metaphor for life. But in reality, really the only choice is to just surrender to the process. And then once you've made up your mind that I'm in this thing, right, there is no other way, then you quit focusing on that, right? And you can start to appreciate other things. Well, gosh, like one guy mentioned to me, we were in the middle of this thing. Oh, did you see the shooting star that just went past? This has been one of my favorite things. Or, you start to see the guys around you and what they're going through and support each other. Or you start to get in that flow state and think about, well, why am I really here? For me, I'm thinking about my son. And, you can just kind of take your mind to a different place where that growth is starting to happen because you forgot about, the hard shit.
Yeah, totally, man. Totally agree with that. It's the magic in the journey, isn't it? The destination's in the journey. It's not not when you arrive.
100%. What, so given what you do in coaching now, it's obvious that what we're talking about is some of what you do for people who are interested in your coaching. So here's kind of a silly question. We go back to human design where you said you took 2 hours and sort of had it figured out. If all it takes is 2 hours, what does that really look like in a coaching engagement?
Yeah, so good question. Look, I typically don't have long-term coaching engagements. I think once you give people the keys to the kingdom, the blueprint to yourself, they're essentially self-sufficient then. And I don't want to create people dependent on me. I've got other projects I'm working on that are just as exciting. So it's really, at the moment, it's 4 sessions I take someone through because 2 hours wasn't enough. I had a rushed thing and I had to come and revisit that with someone else to go a little bit deeper. So now I just do 4 sessions. It's typically one a week over 4 weeks. And I give people the tools and the techniques to then navigate their own life successfully. I give them that blueprint and then some training for them to actually go and implement that. And once they've done that, those 4 sessions, it's then plug them into an online program where they've got additional resources and other tools they can tap into if they need to, and a community. So it's an experiment. This is for me, it's been, I keep being told this, it's a 7-year experiment. Once you actually discover your design, you then need to go and experiment with that. Don't just believe it because I've told someone, and I'm big on having to critically think and, litmus test things as well, right? Just because someone says something doesn't mean it's true. So the experiment is you go out there into the world and be consciously aware of this new information. And you test this. You test these assumptions. You test this decision-making strategy. You test the feelings that come up. You test the purpose. You test the environment and working style. You test essentially the 16 success codes I give people. And I teach them how to use them. And that's the framework and the blueprint. And they don't need me anymore. Sure, if they want to go much deeper into that, there's opportunity to do that. But I find most people don't need to. And that's really what I'm all about is empowering people to go out to the world knowing who they truly are, making maximum impact without having to rely on me or anyone else for that matter. So it's the beginning of a 7-year journey.
7-year journey. I better get on this shit. I'm running out of time in life here. I think our YouTube version of this is gonna go viral because there's a cat jumping around. People love cat videos, right? So we're gonna be an instant hit. No worries. I've got my dog here wondering when she's gonna start barking, just because life happens during podcasts, as one of my friends says. But no, I kind of going back to as you apply those things and test them. I was just thinking about what you said. You still have to work, right? You're applying your gifts, your passions, going about it in a way that resonates for you and energetically and all. But there's still work, right? There's still work to be done. But something you just said in that reminded me of a question I got recently that it kind of perplexed me. somebody was asking about my business, and they said, well, how are you marketing, or what are you doing to get customers? I had to think about it for a second, because the answer was, I don't. Right. Like, once I started doing what I was doing that I enjoyed, that I felt that I was good at, the rest just happened. In fact, to almost to the point of, I have to sort of say no or not right now to things. So yeah, maybe that's just the polar opposite of when you're pushing too hard, that friction of the rock going up the hill. The other way around is, it's much easier.
You're in flow. You're serving at the highest level. You're doing what you love doing, and you don't have to try around.
Um, yeah, yeah, no, and I was just thinking back to my son, right? I mentioned this 13-year-old. So, fantastic for somebody who can plug in at 39, or in my case, 49. I have a 13-year-old. How easy is it for a younger person to go through some of the same exploration or training or tools, or, is there a version that's a little more, sort of teen level that they can relate to, and get a head start in life over the rest of us?
Absolutely. No, that's actually one of the programs I'd love to roll out. I'd actually love to introduce this to the education system. And obviously parents need to be on board with this. Parents need to go through this process first to understand the depth of this and the richness of this. But imagine if you could then coach your child, now having this whole different level of mind as to how you're going to guide them in life. I wouldn't say sort of push them. You want to guide them. If someone's designed to be an entrepreneur or creative, you want to give them those opportunities to step up and learn. All the other kids at school might be going out there playing football, but if your kid's designed to be a creative, then put them in those opportunities where they've got the opportunity to step up. So that's typically how this works. And then obviously kids choosing, a university degree, if they're going to go to study on tertiary education, then, well, what do they choose? They've got to make a decision that could impact the rest of their lives. And how many kids quit, pivot, complete their degrees, and then never use it, right? Because it wasn't for them. Their parents have told them that that's what you have to do, which is the case in a lot of cultures, or they feel like they have to do something that's going to lead them to financial success, but ends up in misery. And that's more than half of corporate America, unfortunately. So, including here in Australia and other parts of the world. So I think when you can, because a kid won't grasp these concepts, especially at sort of 13, they haven't fully developed their conscious mind yet. So if you can, as a parent, go through the process first and then take your child through it. And I'm actually doing this with my brother right now, going through with his kids. He's got a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. So I'm literally going through doing this analysis, giving him his children's blueprint. It's just like, right, here's your area of focus over the next few years. These are the things that are going to get pulled out of your child as they get older, and these are their gifts. So give them opportunities to work on those gifts, and their weaknesses, don't sort of force them, because that's where they're going to struggle in a way that's going to be sort of a lot of friction and resistance. So it's about guiding parents on how to become a really good coach for their kids, knowing who their kids truly are. And that's the hard part. It's not about forcing, it's about just having a different level of understanding.
Awareness. Gosh, how much of life is that, right? Yeah, I love that idea of both parents and then the children, going through a similar process. Let me ask you this. I don't know if let's just test this out with what you found with these tools, and where in life it can start to apply. I love that concept, and I love the idea that parents would buy into the need for that sort of awareness and education for children. Unfortunately, at least from my view, changing the education system itself is quite a long uphill journey. So one of the things I've been working on is trying to take some of these tools and self-exploration techniques into sports as a microcosm, as a metaphor, as a little environment where even more parents would buy into, hey, I'll give my son, daughter, whatever edge in performance that, I can find. And if there is something that gives them an edge in sport that can then come back to life, right? Give them a discipline with the way they approach school, emotional training with the way they approach being a teenager, right? Make them a little bit better at home, make them a little bit better at school by way of sport. At least here, I find that the parents are willing to invest crazy amounts of time and money into sports. So that was just kind of my approach, something I'm working on with a buddy, to use that as an entry point, as a platform, as a delivery mechanism, or at least as a starting place.
I think it's great, Michael. That's actually been my anchor as well. If I think back 25, 30 years, I got into sport and fitness at a young age and competitive weightlifting, and it's always been something I go back to. When there's stress, I can go back and have a training session always, and it dissipates that stress. And stress left unchecked, manifests in the body. It actually crystallizes and affects us physically. Same as trauma. Trauma is something that I think we don't speak anywhere nearly enough about. And, from what I'm studying at the moment around certain topics, releasing trauma can actually heal most diseases out there. And so that's something I'm really curious about as well. So I love what you're doing around using the physical body and sport as a mechanism. And that's definitely where I started out too, right? So just keep stacking that cool, because you're right. The education system could take, it's been around for 100 years and it's definitely outdated. So I think it's up to parents like yourself to work with their own kids. And if we get enough parents as a collective doing the same sorts of things, that's when we start to get change. So kudos to you, man.
Oh yeah, no, thank you. It's, you have a kid, or it sounds like you may be an uncle. You find inspiration in them. Sometimes
Absolutely.
it's like, who's your hero? Gosh, my kid, because I see what they're doing at such a young age. The other thing with to me, with sport, with movement, movement's one way to start to release some stuff in the body. Breath comes in, and that's one of the reasons I asked you about kind of your daily practice earlier, and mentioned some things from ancient wisdom, but also you just mentioned healing. I've gone through some super ventilation type of guided breath exercises, so similar to some Wim Hof stuff. But what I saw come out of it was different for everybody. And for some people, there was a very emotional release to it. Others, it was a different sensation. And there were a few people that tapped into some really healing sorts of things. One or two in particular were past. One was past life related, and another was a man or a woman, I don't recall, who had an unresolved issue with their deceased father. And through this breath exercise, we're able to go and have a conversation with that parent and resolve the issue that was left unresolved at time of death, and get past that emotionally.
It's so powerful, isn't it?
It is.
Where was that in school?
Right? Yeah, the very, very skeptical part of me believes that you're never going to find it traditionally, because breath is free. And unfortunately,
exactly,
when you follow the dollars, it doesn't lead you that way.
You got it, man. Yeah, one thing I'll add, for me, one of my biggest forms of meditation is dance. About 15 years ago, I got involved in Latin dancing, and I just love it. It's one of those things, and once I then discovered about movement and breath and energy and de-stressing, you're breathing and you're moving, and there's rhythm involved, and there's music, and Latin dancing is all about a partner dance, so there's always cute girls, right? So it kind of ticks a lot of boxes in terms of an outlet, and I haven't stopped that for 15 years. So for me, I know when I've had a really stressful week, or and what is stress really, if we break it down. But for me, it's like if I've had just a lot of grind, I call it the grind. When I'm doing things I'm not designed to do, there's a lot of resistance that comes up, and I store stress in my back, and I can feel it.
Yeah.
I just go and dance for an hour, and it's all gone, literally. It's game changing. It's either that, and that's actually more effective than going for a workout at the gym or going for a run or anything else, because now I'm actually expressing in a creative outlet, as opposed to just letting off steam, so to speak. So that's been my medicine for 15 years. And it's incredible. I actually encourage more people to get into it. And I remember being in the military when I first started dancing, and all my buddies are like, that's just gay, man. What are you doing? It's like, guys, I don't know what's more gay. You got you four dudes sitting around at a pub all night drinking beer, talking the same stuff, or me out there dancing with 30 girls in a dance class. I said, I don't know what's more gay, right? And I'm learning something new, and I'm expressing, and I'm healing. So it was a really interesting situation because it culturally I wasn't accepted, but I didn't care.
Yeah.
This is where I don't sort of fit into another example of where I just did not fit in, but I didn't care because it felt good.
Good for you.
So yeah, even to this day, I still do it. So it's I encourage more people to explore that.
Yeah,
Doesn't have to be Latin dancing, but find something that you love.
Way to follow your heart in that. And you mentioned just the healing power of sound earlier as well. Music, sound, certain frequencies.
Absolutely, man.
Well, Paul, I've probably kept you from your sunrise ritual or your morning swim. It's morning over there. I really appreciate your taking the time. So I don't want to take too much more. Can we start to just wind down in terms of where people can and should learn more if they want to engage with you, follow what you're doing, maybe even hire you as a coach? What would that look like?
Yeah, two simple things, Michael, and thanks for the opportunity. So I got a Facebook group. I'm not big on Facebook, but the group we're sort of really active in, it's Soul Purpose Mastery. So just search for Soul, SOUL Purpose Mastery. And we're doing, every week I'm giving away a bit of an overview from one person. So it's valued at $300 US, $297. And that's just my way of sort of giving back and getting people engaged and sharing what this looks like. And then Paul B for Bravo, Shepherd, SHEPHEOD.com if people want more information. But yeah, I'd love people to come and join the group and join the conversation because it is a different world. It's a different paradigm in terms of thinking. And, we're not going to solve our current problems with the same level of mind. We've got to look for different ways of doing things if we're going to achieve or get to a better future. And that's what I'm all about. Always looking for different things that are not part of the norm as to how we can achieve that.
Beautiful. Soul Purpose Mastery. I'll get links to all this stuff up in the show notes for the episode for convenience for folks. But, mastery, I use it in the name of this podcast as well. It's just, to me, it's such a fascinating way to look at the journey of life. It's the never ending pursuit of simply being better. And you mentioned legacy, you mentioned it earlier, and you mentioned it in what you do. And I thought about that for a long time as the end state, sort of what we leave behind. But I'm a lot more focused now on how that ties to this journey. That really, it's about getting to a place where you're creating and living that legacy now, right now, and until we're not around in this life anymore.
Totally, man. No destination.
Not a big Facebook fan myself either, but unfortunately, it's a really convenient way to interact with groups like this. So, is that so? It sounds like there's sort of almost a demonstration of one layer of the process that you go through each week.
Every week we do a giveaway, and obviously someone's got to come in and there's an application form where they've got to fill in their name and their date of birth, time of birth. You need to know the exact minute of birth, and just answer a couple of questions. So I've got some context when you're coming into that, and I'll spend an hour with you on a live call, and that gets shared in the group. Obviously trying not to go too personal about things, and we have a bit of a pre-check-in beforehand around what you don't want to cover off. But essentially, I actually lift the veil on some of those success codes for one lucky person every week, and it just gives people a chance to explore that. I've got a team. We put together a 100-page customized PowerPoint presentation on you. So there's a fair bit of work, a few hours involved in preparing that and analyzing that, and then I just go through and present that so that people can really grasp the depth and the richness of who they are and how they can be more in flow in life. So yeah, I'd encourage people to check it out.
Yeah, please. And it sounds like with the intake questionnaire, you're then facilitating a process, or do people need to come to you with a particular, question, conundrum, issue in life, or it's more of, hey, here's my background, then you start guiding this process?
Yeah, look, it's more about it's the 16 success codes that are the foundational elements. So I start with that because that's something that you you can't sort of just Google and find them. You need someone to guide you through that process. So, and you need your exact minute of birth for that. So I always start with those foundational elements of what do those 16 success codes look like for you. And we sort of run through 5 or 6 of them in detail. So this is essentially, it's one of the 4 sessions that I would give to someone if they would come on board for coaching. And, the transformations that come off the back of that are phenomenal. So
nice.
Yeah, I don't get into the specifics around, I've got this particular problem, although I weave that into their success codes so they can see why it's happening potentially and where they should be correcting themselves, and more importantly, how they can correct themselves in future, as opposed to having to have a coach do it for them.
Beautiful. All right. I look forward to steering people that direction. I'm definitely going to jump in there and check it out myself. I'm always curious, always love to learn more, and I got lots more work to do. So I'm excited. I got one more question for you. I just got to ask, knowing you live in Sydney there, right? And, we're just sort of talking about maybe social norms. I've got a buddy from Melbourne that lives here in the States now. I've got a buddy that lives in Adelaide, still some friends in the Sydney area. So I sort of know like the typical Aussie man. And I don't see like a ton of Aussie guys jumping into this. Is most of your engagement domestic, international, men, women, all over the world? What's it look like right now?
It's predominantly women. Women are more, it's funny because I actually want to focus more on men, but men just aren't open to this sort of stuff, It's, which baffles me, because the number one complaint I hear from from wives of men is, my man doesn't express, doesn't communicate. He doesn't express his emotions. He doesn't share. He's very shut down, because that's the societal norm that men can't express. And you've just been through that program you mentioned earlier, MDK project. That's what it's all about, right? So I set out to focus on men, but it seems to attract a lot more women because they're more open to this. They're more in touch with their emotions. And I'd encourage more men to look at this, because if you want to become unstoppable and step into your true power as a man, this isn't just for women. This is for everyone. So yeah, it's a predominantly a lot of US market, actually. US, Canada, not many Australians, funny enough.
Honestly, doesn't completely surprise me, but I will certainly encourage my mates over there to have a look, and guys over here, going out and doing the physical stuff, the Marine, beating you down and screaming at you and kicking dirt in your face, or the rolling around on the mat with an MMA expert, or the crazy stuff that a SEAL or a CIA guy, like, yeah, it's hard, but what guys don't get is like, that's the easy version of hard, right? Like, yeah, opening up and communicating and talking and being vulnerable and being emotional. That's the really hard, scary stuff. So if guys really want to be strong and brave, go do this stuff. Go do the really hard stuff.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that, Michael. And it all starts with knowing who you are, right? Giving you the tools to be able to do that, and stepping into your power.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for your time. I'll let you get to your day, and thank you so much for what you're doing, helping people learn about who they really are and gifts and passions. We need more of that in the world. So thank you.
You too, Michael. It's been a pleasure, and I hope just something of this resonates with someone out there. So yeah, appreciate your time as well. Thank you.
All right, pleasure. All right. Thank you again to Paul. Super cool, right? That got pretty deep. It took a direction I didn't necessarily expect, but that's part of the fun of this. I would definitely check him out. I am checking him out. I jumped in the Facebook group after talking to him. These are different tools, different than I've thought of applying, different than I knew about, quite honestly. But, really the things that he's using them for, that he's working on, eliminating doubt, understanding your energy and your approach and your thought processes, finding flow, decision making, finding purpose, exactly the place we started, understanding your strengths and weaknesses and skill sets. These are all things that we all work on. So hey, if there's another set of tools out there I haven't looked at, tried on for size yet, I'm all for it. So check out the show notes for this episode, which are up at 081. So manofmastery.com/081 to find out where to get in touch with Paul, where to read more, where to learn more on how he's taken human design. He's taken it to this BG5 approach that he's talking about that is potentially a fit and a vernacular for entrepreneurs, for coaches, for executives. So check that out, and just a great guy. It was a lot of fun talking on and off to Paul. I appreciate his time and appreciate all of you guys. Appreciate you tuning in, being willing to learn, being curious. It's all about the journey, and it's a lot of fun. So hope everyone is doing well. Hope you're growing in the ways you would like. And I say this quite often. Thank you for being here, and thank you for the ratings and the reviews and all that good stuff. But most of all, I just love hearing about how people are doing, what they're doing, what's working for them. If they picked up, even one thing out of this show that's actionable and has been valuable. Love hearing about that stuff. So reach out on Instagram, reach out on email, reach out on Facebook, and let's connect. Love hearing your story as well, as much as I love hearing and bringing to you the stories of folks like Paul. Got an amazing doctor in the backlog talking about health and some very contrarian to mainstream media around health sort of ideas, and a few other good ones. Some of our friends from Alpha Hippie and that network, all coming up here in the coming weeks. So stay tuned, reach out soon, and get back out there yourself and get after it.